Hello and welcome to How to Build Empire Armies. This video is going to go over how to build Empire Armies for every single stage of the game, from the early game right through to the late game. So without further ado, let's get straight into things. First of all, the main strengths and weaknesses of the Empire Armies. For their strengths, they are a jack of all trades, with decent units in nearly every single category. They also come online relatively early, with a lot of their strong units being unlocked in the mid game, and the end game coming with a smaller power spike. They also rely on technology, with a lot of their powerful units being artillery and ranged, focusing on faith and gunpowder. As for their weaknesses, they have no monsters or super massive units, so if you're looking for something interesting, then scram. Being a jack of all trades does mean that they aren't the master of any, so if you want to rely entirely on one kind of unit, then you're going to have a bad time. Power spike in the end game is also much smaller than the one in mid, so it can feel like you stagnate in power very early on. Okay, first things first, our early game composition. So of course in tier 0 we have our three lore types, the arch lectors, the generals of the empire, and the huntsman generals. We also have spearmen and archers, and then in tier 1 we have swordsmen and 3 company militia. So for my early game composition, I would suggest leading your armies with an arch lector or a huntsman general, since there's not really a point going the general of the empire since they don't have any abilities. Either of these guys get really powerful ones later in their skill trees, so even if they aren't the most incredible right out the gate, they are worth the investment and early struggle. They're of course completely different, and it really comes down to the huntsman being a little harder to use since they are ranged and don't have that same front line's presence, so if that's not what you prefer, then go for the lectors. As for our front line, we're going with 2 spearmen and 4 swordsmen. Can't really go wrong with your basic spears unit to hold the sides of your front lines. They'll absorb some light cav charging and take them out marginally faster than non-spear units. Swordsmen, similar to spearmen, you can't really go wrong since they are the starting sword infantry and are really your only option at this point. They have a bit less defense versus spears, but more damage versus infantry and a shield, so it more than makes up for it. For our backline's ranged units, we're going with 6 archers. These are dirt cheap ranged units that don't have the best damage in the world, but they certainly do the job just fine in the early game. They have decent range and a firing arc, so can get over the top of enemy heads, but you will still want to get them on the flanks to do the most damage possible. We're also bringing 7 free company militia to pad out the rest of the army. These are a great early game hybrid weapons unit that I've come to have a much larger respect for. They do decent pistol damage from a short range and have decent melee stats and speed, so are great for getting around the enemy to shoot into their backs or even charge them in melee to break them faster. They can also vanguard deploy and fire on the move, so work pretty well as sneaky skirmishers. The strengths of this composition are that it's super cheap, as most early game armies are. They have a massive amount of ranged units for both the backlines and for getting around the backs of the enemies, and the free company militia being a hybrid weapons unit this early means they can perform either job decently well, so are a great choice for cheap versatility. As for weaknesses, it is really lacking some armor piercing damage, so once the enemy has any armor, you're really going to struggle. It's also not the most mobile since there's no cav or speed units, so you run the risk of being easily kited or outmaneuvered. Moving on to the mid game now, for tier 2 units we have halberdiers, shielded spearmen, crossbowmen, empire knights, and pistoliers. In tier 3 we have great swords, huntsmen, empire captains, Reichsguard, knights of the blazing sun, outriders grenades, mortars, handgunners, war wagons, flagellants, warrior priests, wizards, and witch hunters. As I said, this is where they get the majority of their power spike, so it makes sense to get the majority of their units. So for my mid-game composition, of course, you're still going to have the arch lecturer and the huntsman leading your armies, and by now each of these lads will be coming online and using their abilities a lot more in battle. The lector will have a couple of abilities to be able to support his units, as well as doing decent front lines battling, possibly on a mount. The Huntsman General will be using his abilities to set up other units to do a lot of fire damage. Speaking of which, you will be able to get one of many kinds of casters available to the Empire, but the one I will always recommend until I die is the Bright Wizard, also known as the Firecaster, because that lore of fire is... ooh, it's just too good. Especially if you have something that can make units more vulnerable to fire, like say a Huntsman General with an oil flask. As for the front lines, we're upgrading our spearmen to halberdiers since they are just better in pretty much every way that matters. They have better melee stats, damage, and leadership, so perform that same job but just do it better. They still want to focus down large targets if the enemy brings any, but if not, their AP damage means they are passable versus infantry as well. We're of course upgrading our 4 swordsmen into 4 great swords. Of course, these lads are your real front lines infantry shredding machines. They sacrifice some melee defense compared to regular swordsmen, but they do gain a massive amount of armor and leadership, and of course all that juicy AP damage with a bonus versus infantry. Every other greatsword unit in the game is a version of these OG frontlines dominators, so you absolutely want to take them with you. As for our ranged units, we're bringing 3 huntsmen, which are basically just specialist archers that gain a bonus versus large. They still aren't great versus regular infantry or anything that has a lot of armor, but against large targets such as single entities, they can easily tear shit up and burst down targets. They have top tier range and can sneak around with that stalk, so just get them in position and watch them melt wherever you aim at. We're also bringing 3 handgunners. Not really a question why I chose to put these in. They have outstanding armor piercing damage that fire in huge volleys that can get through even the most armored targets. The only downside is they fire in a straight line, so they do need an angle to fire to get off shots. But if you find them that angle, they will pick up a serious number of kills. We're going to bring 2 grenade outriders. I much prefer these over the regular outriders, even if the armor piercing damage isn't quite as much. The area of effect attacks that blow up blobs of infantry are too good and can put a crack in the morale of any enemy before they even reach you. I'm also taking 2 Knights of the Blazing Sun, best charge bonus of the cav available at this tier, and they have really great speed. On top of that, they are much easier to recruit than Reichsguard, which at this point, if you ask me, are a pretty pointless unit. Unfortunately, there's no option for melee fighting cav, so if you struggle with micro, then it might be worth dropping these guys and filling the army with 2 of the next unit. If you're feeling brave enough to use them, then just keep them on the move and they will shatter the enemy in no time with that massive charge bonus. Our final units are 2 mortars, and these are your bog standard anti-infantry artillery units. Huge range, decent damage, and explosive attacks make them great for softening up the enemy before they even get to you, and even once they do. Their steep firing arc means they can actually target enemies in the front lines without the risk of shooting your units in the back. Just make sure to keep them clear of explosions. Pro tip, if you hold Alt while right clicking, you can actually target exactly where they're going to aim rather than just their unit in general. The strengths of this composition, of course, are the range superiority. No matter what the enemy brings at you, you have a ranged unit that can tear it to pieces. You also have a much sturdier front line, it's more armored and has higher leadership than before, not to mention the damage buff, so it'll stick around a lot longer versus bare enemy troops. As for weaknesses, this is vulnerable to getting flanked since a lot of your damage relies on these ranged units. If it gets shut down, you don't really have a way to come back, so just keep them safe. It's still not the most mobile army in the world aside from the cav units, so it can take things a while to get from A to B, especially if you want to keep all those ranged units safe. Finally, we come to the late game. In tier 4 we have Demogryph Knights with halberds, cannons, the Hellstorm rocket battery, and War Wagon mortars. In tier 5 we have Hellblaster volley guns, the Steam Tank, and the Luminarch of Heish. As for our composition, of course, Arch-Lector and the Huntsman General. By this point, the Lectors should have all their prayers and a mount, and should be doing a great job in the front lines while supporting your army with all their prayers and auras. Huntsmen should have all their abilities on the go and be dousing enemies in oil while sniping out key targets for massive damage at the same time. The Wizards at this point should have all their spells and overcasts of the most powerful ones, along with a couple of ways to generate more magic and a mount. Zip them across the battlefield to provide support where it is needed. Our front line is staying the same of 2 halberds and 4 greatswords. We are dropping 1 of each of the Huntsmen and the Handgunners to make room for some other units that I'll come to in a moment. 2 Grenade Outriders, same as before. We're replacing the Knights of the Blazing Sun with Demogryph Knights, with or without halberds, and no matter which you choose, you'll get a great unit. It really comes down to what you're going against more. Mostly large, then go halberds. If not, go regular, since otherwise you're literally sacrificing stats for pretty much no reason, since regular have better charge and melee stats and a shield. We're of course upgrading the mortars to 2 Hellstorm rocket batteries, since it's a no-brainer. The only downside is the worse accuracy. I mean, you can't really target the front lines without some risk of a little bit of friendly fire. The damage and range get a massive boost, and watching these guys in action is it's a true beauty to behold. Our final units are the 2 Luminarchs of Heish, and now I can see these guys being a bit of a controversial pick since they fire so damn slow, and you can get a Hellblaster volley gun for a low price with still a lot of damage. I know that, but there's still something about these guys I love. They fire single shots that just annihilate whatever they're aimed at, and the damage is armor piercing, magical, and fire, so there really isn't much that can stop it. Besides, they are more mobile and come with auras that give you free value for them just being there. The strengths of this army, again, total range superiority that can only really be challenged by the Skaven, and even then, you will be firing the first shots with that Hellstorm rocket battery. There's also a very balanced army that is useful in most situations without having to get super specific into one, so no matter who you're going against, this army will do decently well. Now the weaknesses, this is still very ranged heavy, so if the enemy can rush and swarm you, it's going to be a bit painful. It's also still not the most mobile, despite 2 bits of the artillery being basically chariots. And finally, of course, the most glaring weakness of this army is not enough meme tanks. In all seriousness, if you want to throw in some tanks, you could easily swap out either the Cav or the Luminarchs, and the army would be more or less the same power level. Remember, these compositions are what I would personally run, and you're of course free to swap units in and out as you see fit. But this to me is the most balanced endgame composition for the Empire. Now to close you out and see how this army performs in battle, I'll hand you over to live commentary Miles. Take it away. Thanks for that, Miles. Yes, everyone, here we are with the Empire going against the Empire. The Empire, alright, they're just a good balanced army, so pretty much all these battles are going to be going against them for consistency's sake. Now, of course, I'm using my standard going against the AI lineup of 3 lines. So I've got my melee lines, I've got my range lines, and then my artillery, and then my cav just can there, but they're going to move. It's not the best line if you're going against the enemy and the enemy has a fire spellcaster, but when you're going against the AI, they're kind of stupid, they don't have a firecaster, so this is going to be alright. Let's just speed things along here until we get some action. Of course, the Hellblaster... Hellblaster? They're called the Hellblaster rockets, aren't they? Yes, the Hellstorms, exactly what I said. The Hellstorm rocket batteries are going to be firing off on both sides. We're right out the gate, so my great swords are maybe going to be taking some hits if they manage to land any shots, but it looks like we might have escaped. Oh my god, you did not escape. Was that full turret? No, they're getting back on it. It's all good, it's all good. So yes, my greatswords are certainly taking some hits, but as are theirs. And of course, on this right flank, we saw the greatswords moving up, so I moved in my Outrider grenade launchers, stuck them on skirmish, and just said, "Hey, bro, just fuck up that greatsword shit." And they are certainly doing that. I've also moved both my Luminax around to target this Emperor's Wrath meme tank because, well, look how much they're getting hit. Oh my goodness, that was like 1500 damage or something ridiculous. Wait, is that right? Can I do maths? Probably not. But yes, those guys are going to melt that steam tank and then they can just fire at pretty much anything that they want. So we see that the Empire Captain is charging on my spellcast here. I'm moving, I can't remember where I'm moving my spellcast here, but he's casting a spell, I assure you of that. I believe there's a burning head about to arrive somewhere. Possibly. No? Okay, never mind. But yes, as he moves in, I get my Huntsman to target him, and he is a bit of a small target, but he is definitely a large target by definition, so he's going to be taking all that juicy bonus damage, and I believe I even get the handgunners firing in. There we go, the Huntsman General has cast his oil flask into the middle of that, and here comes a burning head on 1, 2, 3 into Greatsword. Yes, it's not the best versus armor, but when you make them vulnerable to fire, you know, you just kind of have to... Ooh, a little bit of friendly fire on the halberdiers there, but nothing to worry about. This has seriously crippled their morale. The front lines battle is going fairly decently. We have the General of Empire fighting against my Greatswords. Probably not the best matchup for him, especially if he's on a mount, since he's going to be hit so many damn times because his hitbox is so large. We've got Spearmen versus Halberdiers. They should win easily. Got my Greatswords versus Halberdiers. They should win easily. Got some Greatswords here that I've kind of forgot about, which should probably move into this attack, but you know, I'm not too smart. I've also made my Demogryph Knights get all the way around and charge into their Hellstorm rocket battery, so both of them have now crumbled and the meme tank has also fallen, so a lot of the firepower of this army has been taken away very, very quickly. Some Greatswords here decide to charge Luminax of Heist. Luminax, they're not the best melee fighters, but you know, they can certainly hold their own, even with that 13 attack, just because they have a decent amount of armor and HP. You can see the General of the Empire taking on my Huntsman General, which isn't the most ideal situation, but when he's surrounded by this many ranged units, yeah, I don't think he's going to do too well. Yep, bye, Buckaroo, we will see you later. Another beautiful burning head coming out here on the handgunners, who of course have no armor, so yeah, they are melted and they are crumbling and they will probably break, yep, right about now. I've of course moved a bunch of my ranged units, not the best composition formation over here, so they are firing a little bit into the backs of the halberdiers, and the huntsmen aren't really doing anything, and neither are the handgunners, but nevertheless, they've done enough damage to trigger army losses, and that is the victory. Of course, my strategy could have been better, you know, I'm not proposing that I'm the best battler in the entire world, but I took out their key units like their artillery, their meme tank, focused them down as quickly as possible, focused down their range units with my cav, and then just focus on holding my front lines, keeping my damage dealers safe, which they didn't do, and then finishing them off. So for a little bit more detail, let's head into the stats. As you can see, the Huntsman General, not the most amount of value. As I said, if you want a little bit less micro, probably go for the Arch Lector. But I was feeling the Huntsman General and the Bright Wizard combo. Okay, it's too much fun. And there we go, 8,000 damage done, 51 kills. Not too shabby, only 889 damage value. But you know, when you're aiming at a bunch of handgunners and just evaporating them, I think it's worth it to evaporate the unit because damage value doesn't take into account how much potential damage value that these guys could get. The halberdiers are mostly heading off against infantry, so they're of course not making the most of that anti-large damage, so, you know, they got 22, 56, but the damage value is not too incredible. Somehow 0 kills on that unit of Greatswords, but 290 damage value, so even if they weren't totally involved, that's probably one in the middle, they still did a little bit of work. We have 54 kills, 14, and a whopping 72 kills on these one, although they have... Interestingly, these guys only have 76 damage value. These guys have 290 but 0 kills. They might have been the ones that were fighting against the Lord, if I had to guess. But yes, very good. The great swords, they are beautiful. Of course, they are going against other great swords, so, you know, they're not going to shred them completely. But if the enemy has anything that's chaffy, you know, some swordsmen, some skeleton warriors, anything like that, then they can seriously go 2, 3, maybe even 4 on 1, and sometimes come out on top if they have enough leadership support. It is wonderful. But of course, you don't want them to fight on the round, so let's get to the ranged units. First of all, the handgunners, 30 and 8 kills between them. Not the most amount of damage value, but as I said, I was mostly focusing on the Empire Captain and the General of the Empire with my ranged units just to get them out of combat as much as I possibly could, and as soon as I possibly could. The same thing with the Huntsmen. Yeah, the Huntsmen. I know their names, okay. It's the bow from TF2. Everybody remembers that? Okay, yep, okay, never mind. So 23 and 13 kills on them, but, you know, about 1,300, 1,400 damage value, so certainly respectable. And again, focusing on these key targets here and making sure that they get no value, which I think we can all agree that they did not. We also move them around to fire into these great swords, and the handgunners did struggle to get around because by the time they got there, most of it had already been taken out because of the fantastic work of the rest of the army, but nevertheless they did their job wonderfully. The Demogryph Knights, 64 kills and 43. One of the units did actually get caught out by their Demogryph Knights with halberds, so they did actually lose that fight, because that is the one upside of halberds. They are much better versus large targets, so if you want to fight other cav or other monsters, then take the halberds. You can always take one of each if you really want, but I just chose to go with the regular ones because I want to get better at micro, and because their stats are better in pretty much every single way other than the anti-large damage. The Grenadier Outriders, I love these guys. 139 kills and 113 kills there. Nearly, in fact, that's over 2,000 damage value, and we absolutely love the damage value. These guys are fantastic, going against infantry blobs, going against other cav, going against pretty much anything that has a lot of entities. They just do so much damage. Again, it might not be the most armor piercing, and yes, if you've got regular Outriders, they can attack flying, they can attack much further range, they can attack more armor piercing, but does it look as cool, and do you get 139 and 113 kills? I didn't think so. Of course, the Hellstorm rocket batteries, you know what it is, 149, nearly 2,000 damage value, 98, nearly 1,500 damage value. These guys are bloody brilliant. Of course, the Luminax between them got 1 kill each, but look at that damage value. They were just shooting at that meme tank, which is not a Regiment of Renown. It's one of the Elect Count units, so it is a very powerful unit, and it's also a very expensive unit, at least in the custom battles, so the damage value is coming directly from that, and honestly, it's worth it. If you can focus down a single entity key target, like the Steam Tank, with these guys, then I'm happy. They have done their job very well. If there's a Dread Sorin, if there's a Big Lord, if there's a Slan, if there's anything like that, focus these guys on it and watch it melt. So yes, that about wraps everything up for this battle replay, and of course this guide on how to build Empire armies. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video at any point, then please do consider leaving a like, and if you want to see more videos like this on Warhammer 2 and other strategy games, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'd like to take this time to thank all supporters of the channel, in particular Kobe Said So and It's Your Boy LC for their fantastic support at the Unclean Ones tier. One more thank you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.